The words hung in the damp air like a fragile thread, pulling me back from the edge of panic. There I was, pressed against the cold concrete wall, my heart pounding in my ears like a distant drum. The door at the top of the stairs had clicked shut just moments ago, the sound of the lock turning echoing down to us with a finality that made my stomach twist. My hands trembled as I clutched the hem of my cardigan, the one with the frayed edges from years of washing. The basement smelled of old cardboard and faint mildew, the kind that seeps into everything after a rainy spring. I could hear my husband, Harold, breathing steadily beside me, his presence a quiet anchor in the dim light filtering through the small window high above. "Evelyn," he murmured again, his voice low and steady, the way it always was when he was about to share something heavy. His hand found mine in the shadows, warm and calloused from decades of tinkering in the garage. I squeezed it, trying to steady myself, but my mind raced. How had we gotten here? Our boy, our Tommy, the one we'd raised with scraped knees and bedtime stories, how could he do this? The confusion swirled like fog, thick and disorienting. I wanted to scream, to bang on the door until my fists bled, but Harold's whisper held me still. A secret. In that moment, with the world narrowing to this underground room, I felt a spark of something, not hope. Not yet, but a flicker of the trust we'd built over 40 years of marriage. Whatever it was, it had to be enough to get us through this nightmare. It started so innocently. Or at least that's how I remember it now, looking back through the haze of betrayal. But in the thick of it, I was too blind to see the cracks forming. We were just an ordinary couple in our late 60s, living in the same two-story house on Maple Street where we'd raised our family. Harold had retired from his job at the auto plant 5 years ago, and I'd followed suit from the school cafeteria not long after. Our days were simple, rhythmic, like the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. Mornings began with coffee strong and black for him. Splash of milk from ice sipped at the kitchen table while we listened to the birds outside the window. The kitchen always smelled of whatever I'd baked the night before, banana bread or oatmeal cookies, their warmth lingering like a hug. Tommy, our only child, had moved back in with us about a year ago. After his divorce from Sarah, he'd been 38, then looking lost and hollow-eyed, like the boy who'd fallen off his bike all those years ago. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom," he'd said, his voice cracking a little as he unpacked his boxers in his old bedroom upstairs. I remember hugging him tight, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the way he held on a second longer than usual. Harold had clapped him on the back, gruff but kind, and said, "Family's family, son. Stay as long as you need." We didn't mind. The house had felt too quiet since he'd left for college, and having him back brought a spark of life. He'd help with chores, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, fixing the leaky faucet I'd been nagging Harold about. Evenings, we'd sit in the living room, the three of us, watching old reruns or playing cards. Tommy's laughter would fill the space, deep and genuine, reminding me of Harold's when we were young. But there were little things even then that I brushed aside like dust on a shelf. Tommy's job at the warehouse was unsteady. He'd come home late sometimes, smelling of sweat and something sharper, like cheap whiskey hidden under mint gum. I'd catch him staring at his phone during dinner, his fork hovering midair, a frown creasing his forehead. "Everything okay, hon?" I'd ask, passing the mashed potatoes, and he'd flash that boyish smile, the one that always melted my worries. "Just work stuff, Mom. Nothing to fret about." Harold would nod, content with that, but I'd feel a tiny pull in my chest, like a thread snagging on a nail. We were comfortable, not wealthy. Our savings from years of careful budgeting. The house paid off, a small pension. Tommy knew that. We've talked about it openly, like families do. Or so I thought. As the months wore on, our routines settled deeper. I'd wake early to make breakfast. Eggs scrambled soft for Harold, toast buttered just right. The sizzle in the pan, the aroma of coffee brewing it, was my way of starting the day with love. Tommy would stumble down in his robe, hair tousled, and I'd pour him a cup, watching as he added too much sugar, just like he did as a kid. We'd chat about nothing important. The neighbor's new dog barking at night, the price of gas rising again, Harold would read the paper, his glasses perched on his nose, occasionally grunting in agreement. Afternoons, I'd tend the garden out back, kneeling in the soil with my gloves, pulling weeds and planting marigolds. The earth was cool under my fingers, grounding me. Tommy would sometimes join me, handing me tools with a quiet, "Here you go." Mom, his hands steady but his eyes distant. Harold and I had our moments, 2 walks around the block after supper. His arm linked in mine, the evening air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. We'd talk about the past, our wedding in the little church downtown, Tommy's first steps in the hallway. "We've had a good life, Evie," he'd say, his voice soft, and I'd lean into him, feeling the warmth of his flannel shirt. But lately, Tommy's presence had shifted things subtly. He'd borrow the car more often, coming back with vague explanations. Money from the cookie jar on the counter would disappear, 20 here, a 10 there, and I'd refill it without a word, telling myself it was nothing. After all, he was our son. What parent questions their own flesh and blood? It was on one of those ordinary evenings that the first real shadow crept in. We'd finished dinner roast chicken with carrots, the juices still warm on the plate sand. Tommy cleared the table with unusual haste. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it, his face tightening like a drawn curtain. "Gotta head out for a bit," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. Harold looked up from his crossword puzzle. Pencil paused. "Everything all right, son?" Tommy nodded too quickly, grabbing his jacket. "Yeah, just meeting a friend." The door shut behind him and the house fell silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I washed the dishes, the hot water soothing my hands, but an unease settled in my gut, like indigestion from a meal gone wrong. Harold must have sensed it. He came up behind me, his hands on my shoulders. "He's a grown man, Evie. Let him be," I nodded, drying a plate until it gleamed. But inside? The doubt whispered like wind through a cracked window that night. As we lay in bed, the sheets cool against my skin. I couldn't shake it. Harold's breathing evened out into snores, but I stared at the ceiling, tracing the familiar water stain from last year's leak. Tommy came home late, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, and I heard him pause outside our door, as if listening. My heart skipped, but I told myself it was nothing, just a mother's worry. How wrong I was. The doubts grew quietly, the way mold spreads in a dark corner you don't think to check. Little moments that, on their own, meant nothing, but together began to feel like a pattern I couldn't ignore. One afternoon in early autumn, I was folding laundry in the basement. Our washer and dryer tucked down there since the flood 20 years ago, and I noticed Tommy's work jacket hanging on the hook by the stairs. The pocket was bulging. I don't know why I reached in. Maybe it was the weight of it, or the way the fabric sagged. My fingers closed around a thick envelope, thick with cash. More money than I'd seen in one place since Harold cashed his retirement check. Hundreds, maybe thousands, bound with a rubber band. No note, no explanation. I stood there in the chill, the hum of the dryer filling the silence, my pulse thudding in my throat. I told myself it was from overtime or a bonus, or maybe he'd sold something. I slipped the envelope back exactly as I'd found it, smoothed the pocket, and went upstairs with the warm towels pressed against my chest like a shield. That night at dinner, Tommy was cheerful. He talked about maybe buying a small condo downtown, getting his own place again soon. "Things are looking up," he said, spearing a piece of meatloaf with his fork. His eyes shone in the lamplight, bright and evasive. Harold grunted approval, pleased at the idea of his son standing on his own again. I smiled, nodded past the gravy. But inside, something cold settled. Where was that money coming from? He hadn't had steady work in months. A week later, I found the bank statements. I'd gone into the spare room, his old bedroom, to dust the shelves. He'd left his laptop open on the desk, screen dim, but not asleep. I only meant to close it so the battery wouldn't drain. But the banking app was still logged in. I shouldn't have looked. Lord knows I told myself not to. But my eyes caught the balance before I could turn away. Nearly empty. Our joint savings account, the one Harold and I had built over decades. The one we'd quietly added Tommy's name 2 years ago. just in case something happened to us, was down to a few $100s. Transfers out large ones over the past 4 months, all to an account I didn't recognize. My knees went weak. I sat down hard in his desk chair, the wood creaking under me. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, the same one he'd worn since college. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I closed the laptop, went downstairs, and made cocoa like nothing had happened. Harold was dozing in his recliner, the television flickering blue across his face. I sat beside him, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and felt the first real crack in my heart. Not anger yet, just a deep, aching sadness. This was our boy. The one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during Sunday drives? How could he? The next few weeks, I watched him closer, though I tried not to let it show. He'd take long phone calls in the backyard, voice low, pacing the grass in circles. He'd come in flushed pockets, jingling with change he hadn't had before. Once I overheard him on the stairs. "No, I told you I'll have the rest soon. Just need a little more time." His tone was tight, almost pleading. He didn't know I was listening from the kitchen doorway. Wiping the same counter spot over and over, Harold noticed my quietness. One evening, as we washed dishes side by side, his hands in the soapy water. "Mine drying," he said softly. "You've been carrying something, Evie? Talk to me." I almost told him then. The words were right there on my tongue. But I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean if I said it out loud. Afraid Harold would march upstairs and demand answers, and everything would shatter before I understood why. So I shook my head, forced a small smile. "Just tired, love. That's all." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes gentle behind his glasses. Then nodded and handed me another plate. But the signs kept coming. Tommy started asking strange questions over breakfast. Casual slipped in between bites of toast. "So, how much is the house worth these days, you think? Or you ever think about downsizing? Moving to one of those senior communities?" Each time my stomach nodded. Harold would answer plainly: house values, property taxes, the cost of living, trusting, open, the way he'd always been. I'd change the subject to the garden or the church. Potluck. Then came the day he suggested we update our wills. He brought it up one Sunday after church, over pot roast and potatoes. "You know, just to be safe," he said, cutting his meat with careful strokes. "Things happen. Better to have everything clear." His voice was reasonable, almost caring. Harold agreed it wasn't a bad idea. We hadn't looked at the documents in years. Tommy even offered to drive us to the lawyer's office the next week. "I'll handle the appointment," he said, smiling across the table at me. I remember the way the sunlight came through the window, catching the edge of his glass, and how his eyes didn't quite meet mine. That night, lying awake beside Harold's soft snores, I felt the fear bloom fully. This wasn't just borrowing money. This was something colder, planned. I got up quietly, slipped downstairs in my robe, and opened the laptop again. More transfers. The balance now under 1,000. And an email open in another tab, an inquiry to a realtor about listing the house. My house. The one we'd paid for with overtime shifts and skipped vacations. The one where Tommy had learned to walk. I closed the computer and sat in the dark living room. The grandfather clock ticking steady and loud. Tears came then, silent and hot. Not for the money, not yet. For the boy I thought I knew. For the trust that felt like it was slipping through my fingers like dry sand. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told Harold everything. We were in the kitchen early, before Tommy stirred upstairs. I made coffee with shaking hands and laid it all out: the envelope, the bank account, the realtor email. Harold listened without interrupting, his face growing still and gray. When I finished, he stared into his cup for a long time. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll fix this, Evie," he said quietly. "Together." There was steel in his voice I hadn't heard in years, but neither of us knew yet how far. Tommy was willing to go. We decided to confront him carefully. Not with accusations flying like shards of glass, but with questions that might coax the truth out gently. Harold suggested we wait until evening, when the house felt more settled, less like a battlefield. I agreed, though my nerves hummed all day like a wire pulled taut. I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for stew. The rhythmic thud of the knife on the cutting board, a small distraction. The onions made my eyes water, or maybe that was just an excuse for the tears that kept threatening. Tommy came home around 6, his boots tracking mud on the entry rug. I heard him kick them off, the familiar thump, and then his steps into the kitchen. "Smells good, Mom," he said, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. His face was drawn, shadows under his eyes like bruises. For a moment, pity stirred in me. Maybe he was in trouble, real trouble, and this was his desperate way out. But then I remembered the empty bank account. And the pity-hardened dot we ate in near silence, the clink of forks against plates too loud in the tension. Harold cleared his throat after the last bite. "Son, we need to talk." Tommy's fork paused, then he set it down slowly, wiping his mouth with his napkin. "About what?" His voice was even, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Quick as a shadow, Harold laid it out plain. The missing money, the transfers, the realtor email. No anger in his tone, just the steady facts, like reading from a list. I watched Tommy's face, the color draining from it bit by bit. He didn't deny it at first. Just sat there, staring at his empty plate. Then a sigh, long and heavy. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." The words hit like a slap. Not "I didn't do it, but I didn't mean for you to find out." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, Tommy? Why?" I kept my voice soft, though inside I was crumbling. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. "It's complicated. After the divorce, I got into some debt. Bad investments, gambling a little. I thought I could turn it around quick. Borrowed from the wrong people." His words tumbled out now, laced with excuses. "I was going to pay it back. Sell the house, use the equity, then buy you something smaller. You'd be set. No worries." Harold's hand clenched on the tablecloth. "That's our home, son. Our savings. You had no right." Tommy's eyes flashed then, a spark of defensiveness. "No, right? I've been here taking care of things while you two just exist, mowing the lawn, fixing the roof. You think that's free? I deserve something for that." The air went thick. I felt sick, the stew sour in my stomach. "We're your parents, Tommy. We raised you. This isn't about deserving, it's about family." He stood up abruptly, chair scraping back. "Family, you don't get it. Those guys I owe, they don't wait. They threatened me. I had to do something." His voice rose, echoing off the walls. "I'll fix it. Just sign the papers for the house. We can list it tomorrow." Harold stood too, slower but firm. "No, we're not selling. We'll help you another way, talk to the bank, maybe a loan. But not like this." Tommy laughed, a bitter sound that didn't belong to the boy I knew. "You think it's that easy? They're coming for me if I don't pay up by Friday. And if they do, they'll come for you too." He paced the kitchen, hands in his hair. "Just trust me. One signature, and it's done." I reached out, touching his arm. He flinched away. "Tommy, please, let's sit down. We can call someone, a counselor, the police even." His face twisted. "Police? You'd turn in your own son." He stopped pacing, looking at us like strangers. "Fine, if that's how it is." He stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. We sat in the stunned quiet, the clock ticking on. Harold finally spoke. "We need to change the accounts first thing tomorrow." "Locks too, maybe?" I nodded, numb. But deep down, I hoped Tommy would come back apologetic, ready to make it right. Mothers always hope. He didn't come home that night. Or the next 2 days later, we went to the bank, changed the passwords, froze what little was left. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, asked if everything was all right. I managed to smile, just being cautious. Back home, Harold called a locksmith friend, had the doors rekeyed by afternoon. It felt wrong locking out our own child, but necessary. We didn't hear from Tommy, no calls, no texts. The house felt hollow without him. Then, on the third evening, he showed up. knocked politely, like a guest. We let him in, hoping for reconciliation. He looked exhausted, clothes rumpled, but his eyes were hard. "I need you to sign this," he said, pulling papers from his bag. "Power of attorney forms. For the house, the accounts, dash everything." Harold shook his head. "No, son. We talked about this." Tommy's jaw set. "You don't understand. They're serious. If I don't get this done—" He trailed off, glancing at the window. I tried again. "Who are they, Tommy? Let us help properly." He ignored me, turning to Harold. "Dad, please." For me, Harold stood firm. "We love you, but this stops now." That's when it happened. Tommy's hand moved quick, pulling something from his Pokita small bottle-like spray. Before we could react, he spritzed it in the air. A fine mist, odorless at first, then a faint chemical temps. My head spun, vision blurring. Harold coughed, reaching for the table. "What?" Tommy's voice distant now. "I'm sorry, but you left me no choice." We woke in the basement, groggy wrists, bound loosely with duct tape. The door locked from above. My mouth was dry, head throbbing. Harold stirred beside me, groaning. "Evie." "I'm here," I whispered, heart racing. Footsteps above Tommy's pacing. Then a car pulling up outside, voices murmuring. That's when Harold leaned close, his breath warm on my ear. "Quiet. I have a secret." His words cut through the fog in my mind, sharpening everything. I twisted my wrists against the tape, the adhesive pulling at my skin, but it held fast. Above us, the floorboards creaked under footsteps, not just Tommy's now, but another's, heavier, deliberate. Muffled voices filtered down, Tommy's tense and high-pitched, the other deep and gruff, laced with impatience. "You've got them secured. We need those signatures tonight." My blood ran cold. So this was it his, they. Not some abstract threat, but real people here in our home. Harold's eyes met mine in the dim light, steady despite the fear I knew mirrored my own. He mouthed, "Trust me," and shifted closer, his shoulder pressing against mine for warmth. The basement was colder now, the chills seeping through my thin blouse. I could smell the faint dust from the old boxes stacked in the corner, the ones filled with Tommy's childhood mementos, report cards, baseball trophies, drawings of stick figure families. How ironic, I thought bitterly, that we were trapped down here with reminders of the boy he'd been. "Listen," Harold whispered, his lips barely moving. "Remember the panic room I built back in the 90s? After that home invasion scare?" I nodded faintly, memories surfacing, Harold hammering away down here for weeks, turning a corner closet into a reinforced space with a hidden door. We'd laughed about it later, calling it his folly, never using it. "It's still there," he continued, voice a thread. And I added something a way out. "Tunnel to the backyard shed. Small, but it'll do." My heart leaped. A mix of hope and disbelief. How? When? I'd known about the room, but a tunnel. That was news, even after all these years. "After my heart scare 10 years ago," he admitted softly. "Wanted a backup if things went south. Didn't tell you, didn't want to worry you more." His hand squeezed mine again, apologetic. Above, the voices grew louder, argumentative. "Tommy, they're old, stubborn. Give me time. The other, time's up. Get the papers signed or we take what we need." We had to move. Harold nodded toward our bound wrists. "Work on the tape. Slow." I nodded, flexing my fingers, picking at the edge with my nails. It was loose enough Tommy hadn't been thorough, perhaps in his haste or guilt. The adhesive gave way bit by bit, sticky strands pulling free. My skin stung, but I ignored it. Harold did the same, his movements economical from years of fixing engines. Free at last, we crouched low. The footsteps had moved to the kitchen, drawers opening and closing, searching, no doubt for valuables or documents. Harold led me to the far wall behind the water heater. He pressed a panel that looked like any other, and it clicked open with a soft pop. Inside, the panic room, dusty but intact. Shelves with canned goods, a flashlight, even an old landline phone we'd forgotten about. But Harold went deeper, shifting a loose floorboard. Beneath a crawl space, narrow and dark, smelling of earth and damp wood. "You first," he whispered. I hesitated, glancing back at the stairs. What if they came down? But Harold's eyes urged me on. I dropped to my knees, the concrete rough, and crawled in. The tunnel was tight, maybe 2 feet high, lined with plywood he'd braced himself. My elbows scraped, breath coming short in the confined space. Behind me, Harold followed, pulling the floorboard back into place. We inched forward. Maybe 20 feet, the air growing cooler, fresher. My mind raced. Tommy, our son, reduced to this. The betrayal burned, but underneath was a mother's ache for what he'd become, for the choices that led here. Harold's breathing was labored behind me. His knees weren't what they used to be. "Almost there," he murmured. The end came abruptly, a small hatch, latched from inside. I pushed it open, spilling into the shed. Moonlight filtered through the slats, illuminating tools and garden pots. We were out. Free. I helped Harold up, his face pale but determined. We hugged briefly, fiercely in the shadows. "Now what?" I whispered, peeking through the shed window. The house lights were on. 2 figures visible in the living room, Tommy and a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms. Harold thought a moment, then nodded to the old phone in the panic room. But no, we were out now. "The neighbors call the police." But I shook my head. "Tommy? He'll go to jail." The words stuck in my throat. "He's already crossed that line, Evie." Harold's voice was gentle but firm. "We can't let this go." We're slipped out the shed door, keeping to the bushes along the fence. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the trees next door. My slippers muffled our steps on the grass. We made it to the Johnsons' porch, good neighbors, lights still on. I knocked softly, heart pounding. Mrs. Johnson answered, bathrobe clutched tight, eyes widening at our disheveled state. "Evelyn, Harold." "What's wrong?" "Call the police," Harold said calmly. "Intruders in our house." She ushered us in, phone in hand. As she dialed, I sank into their couch, the floral fabric soft under me. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving exhaustion and a hollow grief. "Tommy, our boy." The police arrived quietly. No sirens, 2 officers, badges gleaming under the streetlights. We explained from the Johnsons' living room. The confrontation, the spray, the basement. We left out the tunnel for now. That could come later. They nodded, radios crackling, and approached our house with caution. We watched from the window as they entered. Shouts, a scuffle. Then Tommy and the man handcuffed led out to the cruisers. Tommy's head hung low, but he glanced our way, eyes meeting mine across the yards. In that look, regret, maybe? Or defiance. I couldn't tell. My hand pressed against the glass. A silent goodbye to the son I'd lost somewhere along the way. The officers took our statements that night, promising to investigate the debts, the threats. Tommy's accomplice was a known loan shark. They said history of coercion. Our boy had gotten in deep. As dawn broke, pink and soft over the rooftops, Harold and I walked back home. The door was ajar, lights still on. Inside, papers scattered on the table, forged documents ready for our signatures. I gathered them up, hands steady now, and tore them slowly. The rips satisfying in the quiet. We'd rebuild. Change the banks fully. Sell if we had to, but on our terms. And Tommy. Well, that wound would take time. The days that followed blurred into a haze of statements, questions, and quiet reckonings. The police station was cold, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry bees. We sat in a small room with scuffed walls, sipping weak coffee from paper cups that burned our fingers. Officer Ramirez, a kind-faced man in his 40s, took notes as we recounted everything again: the money, the threats, the basement. Harold's voice was steady, but I saw the tremor in his hand as he held the cup. "And the tunnel?" Ramirez asked, eyebrow raised. Harold explained it plainly, no embellishment. The officer nodded, impressed despite himself. "Smart thinking. Saved your lives." They charged Tommy with assault, false imprisonment, and fraud. The loan shark Vince, his name was faced heavier counts: extortion, conspiracy. Turns out he'd been running a ring. preying on folks like Tommy, desperate and in debt. The news spread quick in our small town, the way whispers do in a place where everyone knows your business. By morning, the local paper had a blurb: "Local man arrested in family dispute." No names yet, but folks pieced it together. The phone rang off the hook: neighbors, church friends, even distant cousins we'd forgotten about. "Evelyn, is it true?" They'd ask, voices laced with shock and pity. I'd murmur yes, keeping details sparse, feeling the weight of their judgment like a heavy coat dot at church that Sunday. The stares were subtle but there. Mrs. Ellis from the choir pulled me aside after service, her hand on my arm scented with lavender lotion. "We're praying for you, dear. And for Tommy." Her eyes searched mine, hungry for more. I nodded, throat tight, and slipped away to the car where Harold waited. He didn't say much on the drive home, just held my hand at the stoplights. The town felt smaller. The streets we'd walked for decades now, lined with invisible eyes. Tommy's arraignment was the next week. We sat in the back of the courtroom, wooden benches hard under us. He looked small in the orange jumpsuit, hair unkempt, eyes downcast. When he glanced back, our gazes locked for a heartbeat. No words, just that silent pull of blood. The judge set bail too high for him without us. We didn't post it. Harold had said firmly, he needs to face this. I agreed, though it tore at me. As we left the courthouse, reporters hovered outside local TV. Even a young woman with a microphone thrusted forward. "Mrs. Grant, how do you feel about your son's actions?" I froze, the camera's red light glaring. Harold stepped in, arm around me. No comment. But the clip aired that night, us hurrying away, looking old and broken. The community rippled with it. At the grocery store, the cashier, sweet girl, knew Tommy from high school, voided my eyes as she scanned the milk. Whispers followed me down the aisles. Can you believe it? His own parents. I held my head high, basket steady, but inside, shame burned. Not for us, for him. For the choices that painted us all with the same brush. Friends dropped by with casseroles, their hugs lingering. "You're strong, Evelyn," they'd say, but I felt anything but. Nights I'd lie awake, replaying memories. Tommy's first bike ride, his graduation smile. Where had we gone wrong? Harold bore it quieter, tinkering in the garage more, the clink of tools his solace. But one evening he came in with grease on his hands and said, "The pastor called. Wants to talk." We met him at the church, the office smelling of old books and coffee. Pastor Hale listened as we poured it out, the betrayal, the hurt. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," he said gently, "but it might mean letting go." We nodded, but it felt distant, like advice for someone else. Then the calls started from Tommy's lawyer. Plea deals, restitution. "He wants to make amends," the man said over the phone, voice slick. We met Tommy in the visitation room, glass between us, phones pressed to ears. He looked thinner, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry." His voice cracked. I was scared. "Vince said he'd hurt you if I didn't." Part of me softened, seeing the fear there. But Harold leaned forward. "You chose this, son. The gambling, the lies. We could have helped." Tommy nodded, tears falling. "I know. I messed up bad. We didn't promise anything." Walking out, the air heavy with rain clouds, I felt the first stir of something, not forgiveness yet, but understanding. He wasn't a monster. Just a man who'd lost his way, chasing quick fixes in a world that chews up the weak. The trial was short. Vince took a deal, implicated Tommy fully. Our son pled guilty to lesser charges, got 3 years, eligible for parole in one with good behavior. The courtroom was half full. Neighbors, a few reporters. As the gavel fell, a murmur rippled through. Justice, they called it. But to me, it felt like a door closing on the family we'd been. Back home, we started the slow work of mending. Changed the locks again, just in case. Refilled the savings with what we could, Harold's pension, my part-time at the library. The house felt echoing without Tommy's presence, but peaceful too. We talked more, Harold and I, over evening tea. We raised him right. He'd say, "Life just bent him." I'd nod, stirring honey into my cup, the sweetness cutting the bitter. Friends rallied in unexpected ways. A community fundraiser at the church for the grant's recovery. We tried to decline, but they insisted. Checks came in envelopes, notes attached. You're not alone. It humbled us, that grace. Slowly, the stares turned to smiles, the whispers to words of support. You've been through hell, Mrs. Johnson said one day, handing over a pie. But you're standing, and we were. One step at a time. Healing came slow, like spring, after a hard winter tentative at first, then blooming in unexpected ways. The house, once a prison in my mind, became our sanctuary again. We repainted the living room that first month after the trial, choosing a soft blue like the sky on a clear day. Harold rolled the paint with steady strokes, his shirt speckled while I taped the edges. The smell of fresh latex filling the air. It was therapeutic, covering the old walls, burying the memories under layers of color. Looks good, Evie, he'd say, stepping back to admire. I'd smile, feeling a lightness I hadn't in months. We sold the house eventually, not out of fear, but choice. Downsized to a cozy bungalow on the edge of town with a garden I could manage and a porch for morning coffee. The move was bittersweet. Packing boxes stirred dust and echoes. I found an old photo album in the attic to me as a toddler, chubby cheeks smeared with birthday cake. I sat on the floor, tracing his smile with my finger, tears blurring the edges. Harold found me there, knelt beside me without a word, his arm around my shoulders. We'll take the good with us, he murmured. And we did. Money-wise, we recovered what we could. The court ordered restitution from Tommy's assets mall. But Vince's operation got dismantled. Assets seized, some funneled back to victims like us through a fund. It wasn't much, but enough to cushion the new start. I took more hours at the library, shelving books, chatting with patrons. The quiet rhythms soothed me, the scent of aged pages a comfort. Harold volunteered at the community center, teaching woodworking to kids. Keeps me sharp, he'd say, coming home with sawdust in his hair and a spark in his eye. Tommy wrote letters from prison. The first arrived 3 months in a plain envelope, his handwriting shaky. Mom, Dad, I think about what I did every day. Group therapy here. It's helping me see. The gambling was an escape, but it trapped me worse. I'm sorry doesn't cut it, but it's all I have. I read it alone in the kitchen, sunlight slanting through the window, warming the paper. Part of me wanted to tear it up, but I folded it carefully instead. Harold read it later, face unreadable. He's trying, he said finally. We didn't reply right away. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a path you walk one step at a time. We visited him 6 months later. The prison was stark, metal detectors beeping, guards watchful. Tommy sat across the table looking older, lines etched around his eyes. No orange suit, no visitation clothes, plain but clean. You came, he said, voice thick. We talked haltingly at first about the weather, his classes inside. Then deeper. His regrets, the addiction that started small. A bet here, a card game there, snowballing after the divorce. I was ashamed to ask for help, he admitted, hands clasped tight. Thought I could fix it alone. Harold nodded slowly. We all make mistakes, son. But owning them, that's the start. I reached across, touched his hand briefly. Cold, but real. We love you, Tommy. That doesn't change. No promises of bail or shortcuts, just presence. It was enough for then. Back home, life wove new threads. We joined a support group for families of inmates' church basement, folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups. Sharing stories with others eased the isolation. My daughter stole from us too. One woman said, eyes weary but kind. It gets better. Hearing that, feeling the nods around the circle chipped away at the shame. Harold opened up more there, his voice steady as he spoke of the basement, the betrayal. I shared the ache of a mother's heart. Bonds formed dinners with group members, laughter over shared pains. It reminded me we're not alone in our brokenness.
Physically, we tended ourselves too. Doctor visits, walks in the park where leaves crunched underfoot in fall. Harold's blood pressure steadied. My sleep improved, dreams less haunted. We traveled a bit. A weekend to the lake, fishing pole in hand, the water lapping gentle at the dock. Remember our honeymoon? He'd tease, reeling in a small bass. I'd laugh, the sound freer now. Small joys stacked up, building a new normal. As Tommy's parole neared, we prepared. Letters turned to calls, supervised, short. He sounded different, reflective, planning job training post-release. I want to make it right, he'd say. We believed him, cautiously. When he got out, we met him at a halfway house, not home. Hugs awkward but sincere. One day at a time, Harold said, clapping his shoulder. Tommy nodded, ice clear. Now years on, he's rebuilt slowly. Works construction, steady pay. Pays back what he can month by month. We see him for holidays, cautious warmth growing. No full trust yet, but hope. The scar remains, but it's faded, a reminder of resilience. Looking back, I see the lesson in the pain. Family isn't unbreakable, but it can mend if you let it. Love means boundaries, forgiveness means work. We emerged stronger, Harold and I, our bond forged anew in the fire. Life goes on quieter, wiser. And in that, there's peace. And so, as the years have softened the edges of that dark chapter, I've come to see it not as a breaking, but as a reshaping. Harold and I, we're older now, our steps a little slower, but our hearts fuller for the trials we've weathered. Tommy visits on Sundays sometimes, brings flowers from the market, daisies, my favorite. We talk about small things, the weather, his job, the grandkids he hopes for one day. There's no pretending it didn't happen, but we've built bridges over the chasm, sturdy enough to cross when we're ready. Physically, we tended ourselves too. Doctor visits, walks in the park where leaves crunched underfoot in fall. Harold's blood pressure steadied. My sleep improved, dreams less haunted. We traveled a bit. A weekend to the lake, fishing pole in hand, the water lapping gentle at the dock. Remember our honeymoon? He'd tease, reeling in a small bass. I'd laugh, the sound freer now. Small joys stacked up, building a new normal. As Tommy's parole neared, we prepared. Letters turned to calls, supervised, short. He sounded different, reflective, planning job training post-release. I want to make it right, he'd say. We believed him, cautiously. When he got out, we met him at a halfway house, not home. Hugs awkward but sincere. One day at a time, Harold said, clapping his shoulder. Tommy nodded, ice clear. Now years on, he's rebuilt slowly. Works construction, steady pay. Pays back what he can month by month. We see him for holidays, cautious warmth growing. No full trust yet, but hope. The scar remains, but it's faded, a reminder of resilience. Looking back, I see the lesson in the pain. Family isn't unbreakable, but it can mend if you let it. Love means boundaries, forgiveness means work. We emerged stronger, Harold and I, our bond forged anew in the fire. Life goes on quieter, wiser. And in that, there's peace. And so, as the years have softened the edges of that dark chapter, I've come to see it not as a breaking, but as a reshaping. Harold and I, we're older now, our steps a little slower, but our hearts fuller for the trials we've weathered. Tommy visits on Sundays sometimes, brings flowers from the market, daisies, my favorite. We talk about small things, the weather, his job, the grandkids he hopes for one day. There's no pretending it didn't happen, but we've built bridges over the chasm, sturdy enough to cross when we're ready.